Hey everyone, welcome to Hearties. I am Chelsea Freitas from Puerto Rico, and I have a few friends with me here today.
I'm Marg from San Diego, California.
And I'm Dawn Bateman from North Carolina.
And today, at long last, it has arrived. Fresh from the resolution of the writer's strike, we want to welcome our season 10 showrunner, Lindsay Sturman.
Yay!
Yeah.
That was good. So glad.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, the anticipation has been hard. We've really wanted you to be here for these conversations.
Yeah, we are so excited and like so happy that you're here with us. And so we got to meet you last year at Hope Valley Days, but for many of the Hearties here, this is their first introduction to you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and whether you have been, watching Hearties reactions to the season, while you were on strike.
It's been so hard to not engage in any way. I watch the show and I text with the other writers and I watch the Twitter feeds, but yeah, it's been really hard. And then to miss the Hearties family reunion by a couple days. It was but it's so wonderful to read the reactions, and it's so unique because when Calls the Heart's one of the only shows on television where it's people are watching it live and reacting in real time. So it's really this experience. I get some emails sometimes, like through my manager, and it's wonderful to read. I mean, people sometimes have feedback, but I really do.
Shocking that they have feedback. Wow.
So surprising. So surprising.
Yes.
But you love it, and you love to know how people are reacting. So as you go forward, you can do things better. But it's really been magical.
Tell us a little bit about yourself too.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a writer for 23 years. I can't even believe it. And I've written on lots and lots of shows. I live in Los Angeles. I've got 2 kids. My husband has 2 kids. We have a little bit of a blended family. And yeah, we're empty nesters as of about 3 weeks ago. So
Wow.
yeah, it's a little bit of a new chapter.
It's got to be tough to just be muted when you want to respond and share, and we're so grateful to the Canadian writers and the directors who stepped in and gave us some behind the scenes insights. That was amazing. But Anna from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, wants to hear about when you first got the call about the show, and were you familiar with it?
I hadn't watched the show, and I sat down, and usually when you're going to go interview on a show, you might watch 3 episodes or 10 episodes. And I binged it. I just started watching and I didn't stop. And there was a week between the call and the meeting, and I went in there and I was like, well, I've watched all the seasons. And I read about the Hearties, and I just couldn't believe that there was this fan base that was so warm and just this wonderful support for the show. And I'd been on a show called Teen Wolf, which is very different. It's a werewolf show, a teenager show. And that was the other show that I've been on that just had that passionate fan base. And I knew that it was lightning in a bottle. Like, it's just to create a show, and you just watch season 1, it's all there, and you can see why these stories just keep going. And then when I saw the end of season 9, it was the scene with Henry Gowan and Joseph in the jail, and I was like, I want to write on this show.
Oh, that was so good.
That was our favorite. Well, we did a little poll among the admins, and that was our favorite scene of last season. So you picked the one that goes straight to our hearts.
Yeah,
and now that you have more time on your hands to just indulge the Hearties, you got to take a look at these Brazilian fans, because they talk about passionate Brazilian Hearties are crazy about this show. So it's pretty cool. I don't want to slight the Aussies or the Finland people that came to HFR last week. We had a woman from Finland at HFR who said she transcribes all of these Heart to Hearties talks for their members. I mean,
Mhm.
it's, it's this crazy
Unbelievable.
volunteer network around the world that has formed. Pretty
Yeah.
amazing. But so cool to think of you binging away. You probably got no sleep before your interview because you were watching the show.
Well, it's funny because I've worked on so many different shows. As I said, I literally looked it up the other day. I've been doing it for 23 years. And, I've written on action shows. I wrote on Supergirl. But when I started, I worked on family shows and, some law shows. But the show I loved the most was Joan of Arcadia, which
Mm.
I think in some ways is, if you remember, it's very similar. There's a lot of humor, a lot of heart, and there is a faith angle that,
Yes,
that they
I remember that.
tie
Yes.
together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then, so what was your subsequent preparation for the job? Then a lot of Hearties asked that question.
So, that's
Other
a
than
great
binging,
question.
other than
Yeah.
binging everything that there
Yeah.
was.
You read a lot of the episodes because it's a little bit different to read it. And then the first day of when we had to do a Zoom room because of COVID. We tried to meet, but then actually it was just too much COVID. But there was new writers and then there's the 3 veteran writers. So they actually walked us through the history of the show. And Allie Devereaux did a lookbook, like a slideshow of all the sets. And it was just great. And she described, she had scenes. It was so wonderful. And then Derek and Beth they went back and forth through each season. And there's always sort of like secrets behind like why did we go in this direction and not that direction? And sometimes, it's something like a cast member, like didn't like a plot point that wasn't in the show, but sometimes that's it. But, or it could just be, oh, we actually wanted to get here. And you're like, oh, I see why you did that. So it was, the new writers got to sort of understand their perspective and the history. And then we started very blue sky. Sometimes we call it like the sky's the limit. Like, what's blue sky? What could it be? And we, kind of came up with, where do we have to pick up and carry through? And in preparation, I read one of Jeanette Oak's books and flew through it. It's just wonderful. And I read some books about, I talked to some other writers about sort of the themes of the show. And as I said, that scene that just pulled me in, and the sort of these themes of redemption and forgiveness and Henry Gowan's sort of epic arc. It's just so unique in television to have 10 seasons of this character who's such a villain. And then he becomes a hero. And then he just sort of rips your heart out with his regret. And then I think that really led us into wanting to keep going, telling that story of forgiveness, which I think is at the heart of Hope Valley. It's a place where it's, where people catch you and where there's forgiveness to be found.
That's so beautiful. Well, we have had a beautiful season, and we've been thinking about you so much of the time because, of course, the writers were sharing, oh, that came from our showrunner. Oh, that was from Lindsay. And so, of course, one of those things was Rosemary's birth. The storyline in which Minnie hands out candles at the shower. We actually sort of reenacted that at the Hearties family reunion last week. And Christy Miller, who is one of our admins, who's kind of the Sarah Maberly of the Hearties team, found these incredible taper candles that were battery operated. And so you had a room full of people lifting these candles and singing This Little Light of Mine. So, and then of course, I hope you saw that social media around the world that night, people had lit candles. So now we need to hear about the ritual from the source. Emily Foster of Illinois wants to know, tell us about this special tradition and how it came to Home Valley.
A friend was up at the Hearties family reunion and sent me a little piece of tape of video of it, and I just was tearing up. So we were writing, going into the birth story, we were trying to figure out, how do you do it differently? And and little Jack's birth had been such an incredible episode. So how do you do something that's, and we really wanted to sort of balance comedy with some, some pathos. And we came up with going into labor in the middle of the town, as well as, her baby shower, just, the not tricking her into the baby shower. So once we had that, and then we wanted to sort of explore the idea of this sort of historical accuracy that men wouldn't be there, that her husband wouldn't go into the birth room. And then, but what if that's what she really needed in that moment? And then my brother and sister-in-law got pregnant and I was throwing a shower. And so we did this candle tradition, and it was my sister-in-law's tradition. And it was so beautiful. I mean, my adult kids were here and everybody was crying. And then we created a group chat of everyone at the shower, and people were from all over. And then once Jackie went into labor, we all, we texted everyone lit their candles, and we're sharing photos of it. And I don't know if you know this, but my niece's name is Goldie.
Oh,
wow.
We did not know.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, and it fit in with there was a story point because, of course I wanted the name. I loved it so much, but that, Rosemary and Marigold. So there was all these things that we could kind of pull together. And I didn't tell Pascal and Kevin that it was my niece's name. I just said, "What do you think of Goldie?" And they loved it. I was like, "Okay, great."
Yeah, we interviewed Pascal, and she said she described that conversation and how much she loved it. So it just feels right somehow for Rosemary.
It does.
Oh, lovely. Oh my word. Well, thinking about Pascal, we talked about her. We talked to her before the strike and things like that, but she was talking about the motherless mother. And that was really an interesting plot line. So can you talk about that and how that was the genesis of that particular storyline?
Yeah, we wanted to, how do you tell a baby story? And actually, one of the first shows I was on had a baby, and we really struggled because, I love babies, but babies don't do a lot. So how do you tell a story about a baby? And so somebody suggested a postpartum story, and I'd had a little bit of postpartum. So but it was very quick. And I sort of struggled with the idea just because, you have it, it's very hard, and then it's over, and there's just not a lot of story to it. Can we take Rosemary on more of a journey? And then we sort of put together this idea. And I just mentioned this book, and what had happened is maybe 10 years ago, a friend of mine said, "Oh, come to this book reading. It's this Hope Adelman had written this book called Motherless Mothers." And I really didn't even understand it. And then we just drove to a bookstore, and the author did this reading. And it was like this light bulb went off, because she was a motherless mother too. And first Hope wrote Motherless Daughters, and then she followed up with Motherless Mothers. And it was that feeling that Rosemary had, that you have this like emptiness, this thing that you don't understand. And then this book kind of, oh, it's not just me. It's something that is out there, and there's a name for it. And it just gave me a ton of comfort. And so we sort of took that. Instead of doing a postpartum story, it was the mourning of her mom. But then you don't want it to be, depressing or anything. So we took that. That's where we got the idea of sort of taking this story about this loss, but that there was hope and happiness at the end, and kind of telling, when I had my kids, you just realize how much your mother loved you. You're like, how could I love somebody as much as I love my kids? Oh, and that it's very healing. And then for me, it was a little bit of this message that how much, whether moms aren't there, or, whether they, in Rosemary's mother's case, maybe she, couldn't be as available as she wanted, and that people aren't perfect, but that the love is there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow.
I think that's so powerful. And I I think, isn't that the truth, that when you become a mother, then you so realize how much you were loved, and, whether it be by your own mother or other mothers that you may have in your life, that shepherd you throughout your life. And I think that's really the case. Yeah, no, it's certainly, and you're right, having the sort of more psychiatric postpartum it's like kind of amorphous. So this felt much more concrete, and like there were things that you could do with it visually, like the music box and the other treasures that were in her chest and the letters and all that. So lent it a lot of depth.
It was really good. And I feel like it's a unique topic that I don't feel that is talked about a lot on TV, on shows. So that was amazing. And also like something that people could connect to and be like, oh my gosh, like maybe the person was like, I totally have felt this way, and somebody sees me. This is me. So that was so great.
So we're at season 10, well, season 11. So we are recording season 11, but in that timeline, we experienced some new showrunners, and Hearties are always talking about the continuity between season 1 through season 10, season 11, etc. So there was a comment from Kathy Dinsmore of Barrie, Ontario, and quote, really enjoying all the connections to previous seasons. So one of those storylines was the Rosaleen storyline with Henry. Can you tell me about that genesis of that storyline?
Yeah, what's amazing is to have 3 veteran writers on the staff. So it was, there's so much love in the writers' room for the characters. And that's something that it's not always that way. So that's really unique on this show, is how much the writers love the show and love the characters. And Rosaleen was always a fan favorite, and it allowed us to also tell more of Henry's story, Henry Gowan's story, because we wanted to sort of revisit this idea of, he's been seeking, he has regret, right? He made these terrible mistakes, and he's sort of seeking, solace. And that as he, at the beginning of the season, he's going to go to jail, and he's going to let himself go to jail so that, as his own like penance, and that doesn't happen. And he's mad about that. And so then he starts working with his hands, and Joseph has this great idea. And I do love the 3 of them in that scene. I just laugh every time I see it. You guys are terrible liars. And then he's like sort of finding, he's doing the penance, right? That redemption, but then in comes Rosaleen and just throws it off balance. And then it becomes this sort of deeper story of like, how do you find forgiveness? When the story turned to the speech that Molly gave, which I just love her performance so much in that scene, where she explains to Rosaleen that by forgiving, that's where you release all your anger, and you get to move on. And it let us tell the Henry Gowan story, but then also bring back this wonderful actress who's I just think she's so, just so much depth. And of course, we all, I never recognize people very well, but when people, everyone else does, everyone saw her like, oh, it's Rosaleen.
Well,
we recognized her, absolutely.
Yeah, the scene in the stable, and who directed that? It was Elise. That was it. Yeah, because the darkness and the light that was in the shadows in the on his face. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is like the demon and the light that he was kind of struggling with. So physically and visually, we see it on screen, and the writing was so great. So it's just really an interesting juxtaposition between those 2 things. And man, that was just beautiful. That whole storyline was awesome.
How his voice cracks in that scene.
I know. I know. Oh my word.
We have a running joke, of course, among the admins, because we get to see in the aggregate what Hearties are drawn to, and Hearties are absolutely obsessed with that moment where he read to those little, orphan girls in that Christmas movie. Everyone wanted that Christmas story to be released and published. So I think it's really interesting that you guys picked up on that the interactions with children, and that those would be great scene partners for Henry as part of his healing. It's really interesting because that's something that so clearly spoke to the Hearties' hearts, was those interactions with children. So amazing. And of course, Rosaleen's a grown woman now, or young woman anyway, but I loved hearing Derek's comments about, thinking about like what show gets to do that, that you could go back to somebody 9 years later and that they're at a certain stage of development where, that actress and the character would be developmentally appropriate and at an age where they could have this reckoning. And it's super amazing. Love it.
Yeah, it was amazing. So now moving to episode 10. So we have an amazing, comedic scene between, with Rosemary and Elizabeth. They're trying to hide the dress box from all the people in town. So Paul Redford, who was new to the writer's room in season 10, he wrote this episode. So does he have a knack for setting up physical comedy?
Paul has written for a long time, and he started, I think one of his first shows was Coach. And so he started writing sitcoms. And I think back in the day, it was, a bunch of comedy writers, sitting around a table, just cracking jokes. And I think he sort of learned the old school ways to write, comedy. And then he wrote, I think he was on The West Wing for 5 years. And that's a show with a lot of comedy and a lot of heart, and actually a lot of faith too. He told me that the 2 shows on television with the most faith are The West Wing, because President Bartlett would quote scripture a lot, and The Simpsons, because they go to church. So, but yes, I mean, he brought so much comedy, and he just loves the comedy. I mean, I think he would joke that it's, Lucy and Ethel, like that's the level of, the comedic chops. And I think he gave us a little bit, I felt like it's sort of, he really brought both ideas, and of course the dialogue is beautiful dialogue, but also I think it's sort of having a real veteran comedy writer lets you sort of, spread your wings a little bit more and push the comedy. Because, with the shower scene, I just think it's so funny. And there's a little bit of lightness there, when everybody's creeping by, is that exactly where they might have walked? But it's, you just, for me, I'm just going with it because it's them all having fun, and it's full of love.
Yeah.
Well, the box was so perfectly large and unwieldy, and
they're just struggling to carry it, but also wanting to hide it. And then
when they put it behind them, and that's where the actor just adds so much. Like that wasn't scripted.
Oh, really?
You're going back.
I don't know what combination of Shaban and Pascal and Aaron that was, but it was genius. It really, to have them turn around and then Chris's little wave, like the kind of clueless guy, like what is happening over there? It was funny. It was just what we needed.
So Joannie Mobley, I hope I'm saying your name right, of Louisiana, she commented, "These are frontier people. How could they all come up with these fancy clothes in 48 hours?" So we love that you addressed that, that practicality here. So tell us about why you went with the sharing of ball gowns among the women.
I'm so glad you and Joannie asked that. So once we knew that we wanted to do the governor's ball, and because it gave us so many. It was you could have Lucas's Jimmy Stewart moment, right? So that we had like a big group. We just liked the word governor's ball. It sounded very, what you might do for a governor. And And it also let us have that intrigue of, when Elizabeth and Lucas are dancing and they're whispering and, they're smiling and, keep the smile.
Yeah.
So you had like a little bit of the Ocean's 11 where people are, at a fancy party and there's some intrigue. But then we had this problem. So I think I texted or called Barbara right away. And I was like, can we do tuxedos? Can we do all these ball gowns? This is going to be, this is going to be a problem. And then she came up with this brilliant idea of using old wardrobe. So from Claire and Jesse's wedding, the bridesmaids dresses. And then we turned it into a story. And I just love that when sort of necessity dictates a story, because it's somehow sometimes when you have like less room to maneuver, it forces you to just, I don't know, forces you to maybe like come up with creative solutions rather than the sky's the limit. So
Right.
we then, we laid it in early. Florence doesn't want to go because she doesn't know what to wear. And then it got us this, what I kind of loved is everybody, the whole group of friends getting ready for the ball together. I thought that was so fun. And, when you're like, young and you're getting ready for a party with your friends. And then of course, just decorating the ballroom. And that of course picks up the story of Rosemary, getting in over her head with the governor. So.
Among the admin chat, we were saying it felt like almost like a red carpet moment when you got to see each of them come in and they each had their kind of grand entrance. And
let's see what this person's
totally,
wearing.
totally. Yeah.
And it all looks so amazing.
Oh my gosh. I mean, literally one after one, you're like, oh, stunning. Wow, stunning. And they're all wearing the same size. So amazing. Through the magic of television, they all seem to, or they're all excellent seamstresses and can whip a stitch very quickly.
Well, it would be in the time. That would be part of what they did.
Yeah, no, of course they would had to repurpose things and make them work. But no, it's so true what you say. I'm from the Midwest originally and was in the pep club, which is not such a big deal out here on the West Coast, but a very big deal in the Midwest. And I mean, half of the fun of a homecoming dance, which everybody's gearing up for right now in our schools, is all the prep that goes into it, all of the dress planning and all the decorations and all that stuff. So I think we got like the most pulled out of that ball. Now, I should say that we are being faulted a little bit by some Canadians who say we don't have governors in our province. So, we have lieutenant governors, evidently. So
I think we're playing a little fast and loose with that. I feel like we did some research and maybe it was that it was lieutenant governors. And
yes, evidently. Let's just use some license there, artistic license. Okay, so there was such an interesting emphasis last night on the two heroes. You had that cool scene in the Valley Voice in the beginning where Lucas and Nathan have kind of little bromance, like, they're acknowledging the heroic efforts of each other and their friendship, and that was really nice. But it's interesting that you featured both their friendship and their valor kind of in equal measure last night. Why do that?
We saw this season as sort of a season of friendship and community, and I think a lot of it is sort of just the state of, the world coming out of COVID, is that I think people really are looking for more community and connection. And, we laid it in starting with Fiona, Faith, and May moving in together and, just to like give them a reason to all be together in the kitchen and talking. And then Nathan and Joseph, that friendship on the camping trip. So just trying to find ways to build those friendship and see it, flower, take place. And there's also this idea, it's actually from Supergirl that all heroes don't always wear capes. The Mountie's the hero, right? But that Lucas can be a hero in a different way as an orator and speaking the truth and standing up. So, I think it was the idea that, just build the mutual respect and friendship, and that people don't always have to be in conflict. They can respect each other, but they're both, they're both heroes.
I love that. And I also love, I remember in the past, some Hearties, I think and I'm trying to think how to word this delicately. When you have a lot of strong women, sometimes Hearties have interpreted that this in some way diminished the men. And I think this season we've seen so many examples of strong male friendships, from, you have Mike Hickam now working in the saloon with Lucas and, helping him out when he's struggling to make it work with May. And, it's just like, there've been a lot of examples this season, I think, of really focusing on friendship, as you say, but also on male friendships, which is neat.
Once we saw Hickam and Lucas together, you started to
really
realize,
worked.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It really worked. From that Belle scene, you just knew, that Belle with Jamie pushing the bell and their reactions. Yeah, that was like a match made in heaven responding to it. So Nathan gets his medal and he has to give a speech. And there's just so much about this that recalled, earlier seasons with Jack. Nathan, Elizabeth gives him some advice about his speech. And then as he starts to kind of stumble a little bit, the crowd parts and Elizabeth becomes like this friendly face in the crowd. At that point, is the story being conveyed from Elizabeth's point of view, or is that Nathan's point of view?
It's such a great question. And I think that it's, the actors and the directing, sometimes you write something and the actors and the directors just take it another direction and you're like, wow, I never would have thought of that. And I think we're seeing it from both points of view. And, he's obviously got his insecurity, which is, so unlike him. And, he's the Mountie and he's the protector. And then he's got, he's got this friendship with Elizabeth and how much they both respect each other. And they, he seeks out that, the something that gives him, the comfort, the security blanket in that moment. But I think from the perspective, I think they're both sort of reacting to, he's looking for her for, to get through that insecurity. And I think she's really like admiring him and seeing, maybe a little bit of, of Jack and the hero.
Well, somebody joked on Twitter, and I don't remember who it was, but they were like, he has many friends in Hope Valley. Like, why does he have to look to her for the friendly face? Like, Fiona was right there. There's plenty of friendly faces. Is there a reason, or was that a director's choice? Or
yeah, no, I think it's just that, Elizabeth is in many ways, one of the people who's most important to him. And he's really, important to her. And I think that, that their friendship was sort of blossoming this season and moving from, the sort of stuff from the past to this real friendship.
When we interviewed Kevin last year, I remember him saying, in response to people saying, this is a story about a school teacher and a Mountie, he said, this is still a story about a school teacher and a Mountie, but now it's a story about their friendship too, and clearly they do have a deepening friendship and have overcome a lot to get there. But it's just, it's a very striking scene. So we have more questions.
There's a great, if you've seen The English Patient, there's a great line where the main character talks about like different kinds of love, and there's filial love and romantic love and brotherly love and and mother, family angus. And I just love the idea that like your love can take different forms. Oh,
I'm so glad you said that, because I think we tend to get into a bit of a Hallmark mindset, and it's like, is it this or is it this? And it can be, it can be different things. So we have right now a friendship love, but there's clearly a love there. So, and it probably brings up some other things, but more to come.
So we're still at the ball, and it was spectacular. We talked about the dresses, I mean, the costuming and things like that, but even with the writing, it was like, who done it? I mean, Mark was talking about like the Orient Express or something that is part of that genre, and the same like timeline. the 1920s, things like that. So it was really interesting.
Oh,
But
right.
and then we had that live broadcast. Loved that. That was awesome. And then Chris McNally's speech. I mean, he nailed it. I mean, that was the most impressive performance that I've seen, especially because it's so passionate. You know, he was all on it, and I think that was a great moment as an actor and for the character itself. So, um, in your mind, how do you set up Lucas this season for that, you know, with the crescendo to that moment of triumph?
Oh, that's a great question. It was so thrilling when we got the dailies back and we saw the speech. We're like, wow. And
Wow.
you did feel like I mean, we always use Jimmy Stewart from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington as like his
Yeah, yeah.
moment, but
It absolutely was Jimmy Stewart. It definitely had that feeling. Yeah.
and he's so lovable, and it was almost like the character was, you know, obviously the character is growing, but you saw the side of the actor that you hadn't really seen because he hadn't had
Right.
scenes like that. Like, oh wow, he's this hero. And we always wanted to do a hero's journey for him because we felt like we didn't know him that well before. You know, we knew him as a love interest, right? And a great guy, but you know, who is behind Lucas? And he had this past, you know, that we had Jeanette, right, from New Orleans, and the phone calls, and the, you know, the box of ice with the money. What, you know, what was, and we wanted to pick those threads up. And as you're saying before, you have 10 seasons of material and 9 seasons of material to go back and, like, you know, follow those threads. So, and we sort of, you know, wanted to think of him as, you know, somebody who's so passionate about the community, and, you know, we pulled on the fact that he was running the saloon. Why do you open a saloon? Well, you love people, you know, and you like bringing people together, and he's always bringing people together. So we really wanted to kind of like highlight that as, you know, a connector of the town and the center of the town. And then of course, this huge weight of the world falls on his shoulders and only his shoulders. And, you know, and he meets the moment, you know, and he stands up. And just what you're saying about his performance, I'm always surprised in the middle of it when he makes the turn, and I know the script, but when he turns and he's like, "You're a great guy," and then he just, you know, but what does? It's just
Oh,
so.
buddy. It was so good. It was so good. Unbelievable.
Really was, and the writing too, because we learned a lot over the course of the season talking to you all, but we talked to Derek about how to write a monologue, and he said to look for that building, and it built and built and built, and Chris just kept rising to that occasion. So it was quite a moment.
I was like, yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I think also you all seem to have embraced some of those threads from those are the wrong metaphors, but you called upon the poker, which I think, you know, some might have been reluctant to do in this show. You know, it's like, do you lean into that or not? And I think you know, I think as Beth Stewart said, you showed how he's going to use it the Hope Valley way. And so those little tricks that he'd done earlier in the season, so sort of perfectly set him up for that Ocean's 11 kind of twist. So yeah, very cool.
Well, my dad always thought it was fun to play poker when I was, you know, like 12 years old, and we'd play cards a lot, and you know, and it was goofy. It was, you know, but I think that I just find poker so fascinating because it's such a mental game. I'm not good at it or anything, but I love, you know, that you're, you know, that it's a skill set too, and that he is really talented. He's this brilliant, you know, not just saloon owner, but he was a brilliant gambler. He's put that aside, but the skills are there, and that you, as you said, the Hope Valley way, you can use them for good.
Yes,
Right.
and I went to a speech that was some high-paid consultant that's written a whole book about poker and how it lends itself to business skills. So it's kind of the perfect. It just makes sense that it fits for somebody who's going to be doing very high stakes negotiating and that kind of thing. it really works, but it's elevating him. So it's super interesting.
So the character of Lucas, I mean, there was a moment in, and I don't know if it was really writing about, you have doubts about what's going on when they were in together with the governor, etc. And we didn't really know until after the commercial break that Elizabeth knew what was going on. And, she had her performance. So, but there was a moment of a lot of casting doubt about Lucas in that particular situation. So that kind of meant that's one of those things. And then there's a lot of pushing in this season. So with Montague shoves Lucas, like just a shove, but it was, intentional. And then we also had kind of a push, but it was unintentional when there was the press going to Lucas, and then he kind of pushed back, and then like Elizabeth was kind of displaced. So and that was, Hearties had a lot to say about that yesterday and this morning and today. So can you what should we read about those moments?
I love that moment in by the hot springs with Montague. And I think that was ad-libbed. And what I love is Chris's performance, because he kind of lets him do it, because he's playing to win. He's not playing to get his way or anything. So he's the poker player. He's letting Montague blow off his steam. And then I think with Elizabeth, it's really, she's understanding the weight of the moment, and I think he puts his hand back to sort of apologize, and she understands that he wasn't, but it's that she's seeing that, wow, he's taken on this huge thing, and it's put him in the limelight. He didn't want that, but that this feels like this is big. This is
bigger, outside of his purview. It's all of a sudden, it's like it's sort of unraveling in breakneck speed. So it was really an interesting episode, because that's the thing, you will not anticipate it at all. If people want to know that Lucas is really bad, they were believing it. And then all of a sudden, the commercial break, and Elizabeth knew the whole time, and Elizabeth supported all of Lucas's kind of decisions in that moment. So, but I think it's bigger than them, kind of thing.
And Paul Redford, he'd worked on Suits, and so he there's a lot of that.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And I love when writers pull from other, because you get into like, this sort of, it's almost like sometimes like a skill set of like, how you write a show, and pulling in the intrigue. But we went back and forth a lot about when exactly to find out when she knows, right? Because you
Reveal,
could, and there's actually a poker term that you use in a writer's room: cards up or cards down.
Oh, wow.
So cards up, we all know. Cards down. So there is a moment where it's, sorry, can you hear my dog?
No.
So, playing that moment, cards down. But when I'm watching the edit, there's no commercial break. And so I was watching, and I was like, this is a long time to not know.
Long commercial break. Yes.
I'm watching Twitter. I love the fact that you can both watch it live and there's a conversation going. It's so unique, those two things. But again, I love watching it with commercials. I can't believe I'm saying this, because it gives you a chance to check Twitter.
That's funny. Well,
we have a discussion post on Facebook, and it's so funny because there's like, oh, Lucas is a traitor, and then there's like boom, 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 and there's like, oh no, he's not, like it all turns around, but you have to like follow the thread down as people are watching it. I also really enjoyed Lucas getting on the buckboard and starting to take off, and Montague like
I was about to fall off.
Yeah. So it's a little justling there, little justling of the bad guys. So There you go.
Yeah, that was super funny. Now let's go to Bill for a second. And, he goes out to search for Madeline and he finds her at a public house. And so Leanne Michelle from Nashville wants to know where the Buxton scene was filmed, but it's like the elevator doors and like the fancy like wallpaper.
So we, often we redress a set, and Gail is just brilliant. And, we went back and forth. Should it be dreary and depressing, right? Because they're not in a good place. And then we sort of settled on, well, what if it's really cheerful, right? And the gold and the flowers, and it's to contrast that they don't want to be there, even though it's sunny and pretty. Jamie just wants to be back in Hope Valley, and Madeline wants to be back in Hope Valley. And it's sort of that's her story, is that she has everything in Philadelphia. I mean, of course we know she doesn't, it's been sort of might be all taken away, but this glamorous life, and really what she just wants is Hope Valley. And I love Bill so much in that scene. His last line when he's,
Yeah.
it's more there than you think.
Right. Yeah.
Did
No,
I get the line
He
right?
wants to provide her with some security, but
Yeah. On Bill's journey with the love life. Mm-mm-mm.
And he's also thinking about, I guess, in that conversation with like what she did of not
right.
about the deed. So he's,
Right.
Thinking about that too. Like, wow. So yeah, a lot is happening in that scene, in that conversation. And so they did an amazing job, of how that area looks like Buxton and very fancy. And I think that's one of the many cool things about When Calls the Heart is that throughout the years, I know that they've redressed a lot of the sets to look like different places, and it always looks so nice, amazing. So yeah, I love that. So what has been your favorite aspect of, what the production team has visually conveyed this season?
It's so incredible, I think, what they do. And I mean, I love there's a shot with the 4 kids biking that I just love so much, because I think it's summer, it's, freedom, it's childhood. There's a shot, just because it's so unique, of Jamie licking an ice cream cone. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
really lovely.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
it's like, I think it's a Peter episode, and it's just this perfect framing. And of course Andrew's just brilliant, the cinematographer. And I just love the moment where Bill falls into the water, because it's sort of it's visual, but it's emotional, and it's the plot, it's the story, all at once. But the biggest change, of course, was the saloon. So and Gail and I, we worked a lot on that, because coming out of the season 9, there'd been a fire. So you sort of you can go back, right? You don't have to do anything, because I hadn't really been a fire, but you could also change anything. And so what we wanted to do is make a few changes to have the space help us tell stories a little bit more. And we'd sort of settled on this, they were coming out of tough times, and it was going to be a season of friendship, season of community. And so the bar it was really hard to shoot the bar, because it was back against the wall, if you remember, and there was no light source behind the bartender. And we had sort of like ND bartenders. We rarely had a character we knew, because you really couldn't shoot a conversation. So I kept thinking of Cheers, and it's, the TV show Cheers, because it's set in a bar, and it's so Hope Valley, because it's, where everybody knows your name and they're always glad you came. It's a place where everyone's welcome. Right?
That's great.
And I just Googled shots of the Cheers set. And if you see the full set, you can see that the bar is in the middle of the room. And you have these like glasses above that catch the light. And by having the set in the bar in the middle, what lets you do is you'd have Sam Malone, remember, the bartender, and then Norm is
Norm,
right?
yes.
Across the bar. And you could actually see pictures online of where the cameras go, so that you get this crisscross, and it pulls them in together. So you get this space between them, and it's the friendship, right? Because they all love each other so much. So we did a lookbook, and I said, to Gail, like, can we just, create a space where we could really use this bar? We also knew that we wanted Hickam behind the bar more to bring him into the saloon. And she came up with she just moved it to where there was a window. So then you had a light source, right? So now it's like feeling alive. And then it would catch the glasses on top went up there. So that was catching the light. And then there is a beam in the middle, but it doesn't matter because you could just create the space between the characters. And now the bar is like one of our favorite places to shoot. So many great conversations are happening across that bar.
Yeah, well, Hickam is already like, oh, here's something, and he's like right there in the conversation. I love that.
Totally. And I don't know if we've talked about this on the air, but certainly among our admins, we've talked about how the booths have almost become a character in and of themselves. I mean, they enabled so many funny and poignant things this season. They were really...
I'm so glad you said that, because we also had that, because again, it's like the space between them. And so, because the big tables were really hard to shoot, because it's just, you get into reality of production is that you've got to populate the room with extras. And that's, that's time, it's money. If you have 2 characters, you could do a really quick scene. And they're great shows with booths. It's a great place to shoot. And I don't know if you remember the scene where it's Madeline and Bill, and it's like the old married couple with the coffee.
Love that.
Yes.
One.
We talked with Neil about that, because it was such a choreographed kind of dance between
they give each other the tea and the cup.
Yeah. There's something about the forced intimacy of a booth that you don't think about it, but it really changes the physicality and the dynamic between them. It's really contributed a lot. So I think it's great.
And then Gail added the check-in table, the check-in counter. And I was like, oh, I don't think we need it. She's like, it'll be great. And I'm like, okay, great. And she added the beautiful panels.
That mural. Oh, gorgeous.
Right.
Gorgeous. Yeah. And the color.
If you go back and watch Newhart, do you remember the original Newhart?
I love all your references to these shows. They're making me really happy.
I have it on my iPad.
Of course, I love Newhart.
And there's a check-in counter.
Yes,
and they have all these conversations and you kind of have a plot point to be there, right? It's like you're not just standing in the middle of a street talking for no reason. And so, and of course, you got the bell.
Yeah, that was a funny scene.
And improvised, I believe. I think they said
really?
Totally improvised. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. And we spoke about Hickam earlier. So we just gotta mention him. We love all the screen time that Hickam has been getting this season. I think Ben is hilarious, and he does this role so well. So tell us how that came to be, because we see him like sliding behind the bar, with the flowers, and then mustering up the courage to ask May, to dance. And so we've been loving that.
Those moments, and they're so well shot. When, Harry peels off and they appear. It's just so perfect. Well, that's where you just feel so lucky as a writer, because you write it and then the actors make it a million times better, and the directors just take, and then and then of course they add music at the end that makes it, John is so talented. But yeah, I mean, Hickam is he's such a funny character, and we were just always trying to figure out ways to bring people together. And there's a joke in writers' rooms where the scene writes itself, and it doesn't, but it flows, right? And anything with Hickam, it just flows. It's so easy to write for him.
Oh, wow.
And he's, he occupies this wonderful, warm space because of just bringing light comedy to any scene, whether it's, just, he's just so wonderful. And then of course the saloon kind of became this community hub, because you always had Hickam there, you always have Lucas there, and having more characters sort of planted there. and it let us do, one of the editors called it passing the baton scene. So you have two characters come in, and then one might peel off, they'll say something to someone, and then, then we'll follow a different character. So you can have almost 3 scenes at once, but it just makes it feel so small town. You can do 6 pages instead of 2 pages. You'll notice in TV, usually scenes on a traditional TV show are between 2 and 3 minutes. Like scenes are short. So I feel like for Hope Valley, that just, it feels right.
Yeah, it works.
Well, any longer period of time we get to spend with Ben Rosenbaum playing Mike Hickam is a joy.
Genius. He's
Joy.
genius.
Genius. Switching gears, up to this point, we've seen that little Jack had questions about his dad, which and undoubtedly the engagement too and planning the wedding has brought up grief and then maybe a trauma response in Elizabeth. And now it's all exacerbated by this water crisis in town, and now Luke is sort of being seized upon as this rising star. In the midst of this, we have the horrible dress. I mean, horrible dress. And it was, I need to understand how Barbara came up with that ugly dress. It's fantastic. But Nathan turns up at the door right when she's in this puffball, and she's already said she's having jitters. Reggie Ma of Edmonton and the entire Hearties universe would like to know, is this just transference, or what factor does Nathan play amid all of this?
Yeah, I think that we really wanted to sort of explore, how getting married would dredge up these memories of Jack. And, that's why we did the scene where she goes back to the graveyard, and the trauma's still there, and she's still trying to make sense of it all, and her fears of, and I think Nathan as a Mountie is a subtle reminder of, the risk you take when you take such a momentous decision and give your full heart to somebody, and, and the loss that she suffered.
Yeah. So they're getting a lot of screen time together. So are we supposed to get that message a lot, like repeatedly?
So Elizabeth is struggling. I mean, she's finally facing getting married, and everything is getting dredged up from the past. And she goes to the graveyard and visits Jack's grave, and these fears that have, she's sort of been in denial about, they're just coming up. And, when she sees Nathan and he's in his red serge, it brings up those fears of this incredible loss that she hasn't fully grappled with. And I think she's just trying to make sense of the world right now. But she has a history, and that history, what the first wedding meant and how that played out. So I think that's where we're just, dredging up her fears, and as she tries to figure out, what to make of this huge momentous moment as the world is coming down. And,
so is it possible she doesn't know what she's feeling?
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
She is at a, she's in a, she's the grief is overwhelming her, and it's sending her a little bit into a panic as she's trying to make sense of the world, as she makes this this huge step that you take that's nerve-wracking for anybody, and it's just
exacerbated by all these other stresses. And then she's got a guy in uniform who keeps showing up at her door and various other places around town with whom she's close, but that's prompting a lot of complex feelings that she hasn't sorted out, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So Susan Langston of Colorado Springs said last night that she thought episode 10 was one of the best episodes in years. The speech, as we've talked about, was totally a mic drop moment, but it was quickly followed by some mic drops that Hallmark dropped on us. Lucas may run for governor. Wow. And that means Elizabeth would have to leave her job and Hope Valley. And then Nathan seems to want to have her think about that very long and hard. So this is a very tangled web. Did you weave this tangled web, Lindsay? It's quite complex.
The Brian Bird always says that Hope Valley is another character in the show, and it's like what it would mean to leave this person, something you love so much as Hope Valley. And with Lucas, Paul Redford actually always saw Lucas as a Prince Hal, and I'm not a student of Shakespeare at all, but Paul is, and it's Henry V, and it's Prince Hal and Falstaff is his when he's young, he's
totally have to research it. Okay.
It once I looked it up, it really is. It's he becomes Henry V, but he starts as Prince Hal, and he's a ne'er-do-well. He's the prince who just his friend Falstaff, and they're always getting into trouble. But then there's a moment where he's called, to step up, and he answers the call, and he becomes the King Henry. Henry V, and which of course I know nothing about that as well, but I love the reference to the young getting in trouble,
yes,
right, in New Orleans, and then he's sort of finding his voice, and it's getting to know Lucas as this hero and a person who he's doing good at the beginning. He's doing his community dinners, and he cares, and he really is a thoughtful person, but then there's this hero inside him that we didn't know. And it's been thrilling for us to watch him, move through that, but it gets complicated. It does.
Yeah, it's very complicated for Elizabeth, and Nathan and Henry seem to want to really hold Elizabeth to account. It feels so much like what Abigail would have done had Abigail been there. I'm sure she's on the phone with Abigail at some point, but and Rosemary too, we're seeing Rosemary's, trying to get her to articulate what she's feeling, but a lot of people are trying to help Elizabeth figure it out. And yet I think, as you were saying, Dawn, Chris McNally described it as a ball that's just like, it's just taking off, and it's like a snowball. It's like collecting skiers, it's like, there's a lot at risk here. And then Elizabeth's mindset in the middle of it. So, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And you got 2 episodes to wrap all that up, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Kristen O'Brien this morning from Sag Harbor, New York, said that the intrigue was such last night that when her husband came to offer her ice cream, she had to tell him, no, I can't have ice cream because I'm on HMIC with the show. And at that point, like, multiple Hearties said, I couldn't have my ice cream either. Like, this is a problem, Lindsay, that Hearties everywhere are rejecting their comfort food because you've got them so entranced and so on the edge of their seats.
Oh, I'm so glad.
They made me laugh so much this morning. And it was neat how many husbands, I think Paul Redford's episode really brought out the husbands last night. The husbands who were offering the ice cream were like,
they offered it and then they sat down.
Yeah.
My husband watched with me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's been watching this season, and I'll tell you that he actually cried a few times.
Oh, that's really beautiful. Well, you don't want to keep Hearties from their ice cream. I hope we don't have any ice cream sponsors, because this is a problem. It just cracked me up. I'm sorry. You had to indulge me this morning with
So funny.
people's comments. Crack me up.
So we're just blown away that you contacted us after the strike was done, and we are just so grateful that you had time for Hearties. And there's a lot that we had to unpack with you, and we're just looking forward to talking to you next week as well, right? Is that
Yes.
okay?
That
All
would be
right.
great.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's been just a great conversation. And Hearties, thank you. We also love to have your input and your questions, and hopefully we are representing what you are thinking as well. So please just flood the Facebook page to get some more questions as we go through episode 11 and 12. And just tune in, Hallmark channel, 8 Central on Sunday night, and we are going to be there. Hashtag Hearties in Twitter,
Always.
or X.
One thing or another.
Whatever it was. Yeah. So X, and but we'll see you then. And this is Heart to Hearties.